Hello, this is Dr. K. Welcome to this week's module on arrays and array lists. This module is based partly on Chapter 7 of Big Java Early Objects, the 6th edition by K. Horstman. In this module, we're going to talk about arrays and lists in Java and the differences between them. Lists in Java are implemented two different ways, one using arrays and the other one using references. In this module, we're going to talk about the implementation of lists that use arrays. In next week's module, we'll talk about the implementation of lists that use references. Let's start with arrays. Most imperative programming languages include arrays as one of their most fundamental data structures. That's because the elements in arrays can be quickly accessed and updated. An array provides random access to its elements. That means that you can quickly go to any element of the array without having to traverse through all the other elements first. An array in Java is an object. In a previous module, we talked about how Java has primitive types and reference types. Primitive types are things like ints, doubles, and booleans. Aside from the 8 primitive types in Java, everything else is a reference type, including arrays. Because arrays are reference types, it means that array variables actually hold references to array objects. The variables may be located on the stack, but since arrays are objects, they are always located on the heap. Once an array object is created, its length is fixed and cannot be changed. Recall our discussion about mutable versus immutable types. Mutable objects can be modified, and immutable objects cannot be modified. So, the length of an array object can never change. Does that mean arrays are immutable? Or is there something else about arrays that makes them mutable? Please take a moment to pause the video and answer that question. Ready? Well, it's true that the length of an array cannot be modified once an array has been created. But what about the contents of an array? Can the contents of an array be changed? The answer is yes, of course they can. You can easily change the contents of an array object. In fact, the ease with which you can change the contents of an array is one of the benefits of an array. So an array object can be modified, and therefore arrays are mutable. For a type to be immutable, no aspect of an object of that type can be modified. For example, Java strings are immutable. Once created, no part of a string object can change. Let's go back to arrays. One nice thing about Java arrays is that they can contain either primitive types or reference types. As we shall see, most Java data structures can only contain reference types. In other words, objects. Java arrays are the exception. They can contain objects or primitives. Arrays have special syntax for accessing their elements. You access array elements with the bracket notation. They also have special syntax for accessing their length. Let's look at some of the ways that arrays can be declared and initialized. The typical way to initialize an array is like it's done in the first bullet here. We declare a variable of the array type we want. Here we're using string. And then we say new string, or whatever type we want the array to be, and then we put the number of elements we want the array to have in brackets. Okay, so we've just declared an array of 10 strings. Now I've got a question for you. After we have initialized that array in the first bullet, and we have an array of 10 strings, what are the values of those 10 strings? If you're not sure, please pause the video and tell me what you think are the values in the 10 cells of that array of strings. Ready? Did you say the empty string? Or maybe you said null. If you said null, congratulations, you are correct. Java always fills a newly initialized array with initial values for the type of object that's going into the array. In this case, the type of object is string, and string in Java is a reference type. And in Java, the default value of all reference types is null. Now, if we had initialized an array of integers, then the default value would be 0. If we'd initialized an array of booleans, the default value would be false. What if we had initialized an array of arrays? What would the default value be then? The answer is the default value would be null, because in Java, arrays are also objects. And when I say arrays are objects, that's just another way of saying that the type array is a reference type. Okay, let's look at another way of initializing an array. Java has a special syntax that makes creating a new array with specific elements easy. If I want to create an array of 2 strings whose first string is hello and whose second string is world, I just write the strings hello and world in curly braces and assign them to the newly declared array variable. This method is so convenient that some programmers get irritated when they discover that they cannot assign this kind of array literal to a variable that already exists. They can only assign it to a variable that is being declared for the first time. There's a way around this, however. You can say new string empty brackets and then put the elements you want in the curly braces. It takes a little more writing, but at least you can do it. To use an array is simple. If you want to assign something to the 6th element of the array, you simply put 5 in brackets after the variable name and assign what you want to it. By the way, I did not make a mistake there. The 6th element of the array resides at index 5. That's because, like a lot of programming languages, Java begins its array indexing with 0, not 1. So the first element of an array is the element at index 0. This takes a little while for some students to get used to, but eventually it'll become second nature to you. Likewise, you index the array variable in order to access an element of an array. For example, if you want the array element at index 4, which remember is actually the 5th element, then you just index the array with the number 4 in brackets. Finally, Java has special syntax for getting the length of an array. You simply call array.length. Notice that this is not a method because it has no parentheses after it. And it's not a public variable either because you can't assign to it. It is special array syntax for accessing the length of this array. If you're going to do a lot of work with arrays, it's a good idea to become familiar with the Arrays class. That's Arrays with an S. This class includes a lot of helper methods for arrays. For example, you can use arrays.copyOf to make a copy of an array. You simply provide the array you want to copy as an argument, and you give the number of elements you want to copy. In the case of the first bullet, we're asking to copy all of the elements in the array, and it'll create a new duplicate array with the same number of elements. In the case of the second bullet, we're saying that if the array has 10 elements in it, we would like to copy 20 elements. Well, how's that possible? It's possible because Java will simply create a new array with room for 20 elements, and then it will copy the 10 elements from the original array into the first 10 positions of the new array. What will Java put in the 10 cells of the new array? It will put an initial value. In this case, it'll put null values because strings are objects, and therefore their initial values are null. Another handy method is array.fill. This method replaces all the elements in an existing array with the value of the second argument. In this case, we're replacing all the elements in the string array, ARR, with the empty string. This is a great method to use if you have an array of objects that Java initialized with null values, and you would rather those values be some other more sensible default values. Filling an array in this way is equivalent to looping through the array and assigning the value to each element, like this. You can also sort arrays with the Arrays class. This assumes that the elements in the array have some natural ordering. In the case of strings, the natural ordering is alphabetical, or more precisely, alphanumeric. You can print the string value of an array in a natural way using the array.toString method. You can check the equality of arrays using arrays.equals. The original equals method on arrays requires that all the elements of both arrays be exactly the same object, whereas this equals method only requires the elements in the array to have exactly the same value. The distinction between being the same object and having the same value is an important one. For example, two strings hello and hello, both lowercase, have the same value, but they're not necessarily the same object. To be the same object, you have to reside at the same location on the heap in memory.